Hello everyone, Coach Joe here. So I've done a couple of videos on squat variations and alternatives that you can do if you have knee problems. But what about if you don't have knee problems? What about avoiding knee pain? What about before you get injured, trying to avoid injury? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the biggest things that we need to remember is that we do not want to compensate and use our knees when we should be using our thighs, glutes, and hamstrings. Form is so important because incorrect form is often what leads to the aches and pains and not necessarily the exercise itself. When we blame exercises for certain aches and pains, but really maybe it's not so much the exercise, but incorrectly performing the exercise. So how do we make sure that we have good form, that we are correctly executing the exercise? So that brings us to the next point. The next thing is that a lot of times these compensations can be caused by weakness in the target muscles, such as the thighs, glutes, and hamstrings. But what gets missed a lot is that they can also be caused by lack of mobility in the surrounding joints, in this case, the ankles and the hips. Because lack of mobility in these joints will not allow you to get into the correct position to put the load where it needs to be. So you start putting the load on your knees. What happens is this overloads your knees and leads to the aches and pains, the injuries, all that kind of stuff. So not being able to get into the correct position because you can't move your ankles or your hips the way that you're supposed to. You start looking for other ways to move into that position, which throws the load onto the knees, and that's when you get the bad form. That's when you start overloading your knees and getting aches and pains. So, how do we increase mobility in these joints? Well, there are a couple of different things that you can do. You need to be doing stretches, ROM exercises, range of motion, and foam rolling. Now, with the stretching, there is static stretching and there is dynamic stretching. Static stretching is great. I love static stretching, and you should do static stretches where you're staying still and you're just stretching out the joint or the muscle around the joint, and you just kind of hold it there, and that's wonderful and you should be doing it. But what that's more for, what the static stretches are more for, is passive flexibility, which is good, but passive flexibility is not as practical in everyday life and everyday training as mobility, as active mobility. And to better train active mobility, what you need to be doing is dynamic stretches. Stretches where you're moving through the stretch. Instead of just holding it there, you're kind of moving it through a range of motion to get more movement in there, which better leads to mobility rather than passive flexibility. Both are good, but active mobility is a little bit more practical, and that's what we are shooting for right now. So you need to be doing those dynamic stretches, moving while you're stretching. Things like lunges with side twist, things like things where you're moving while you're stretching. Anything that you're moving while you're stretching. Like I've done exercises in these videos where you're done in a squat and you're pushing the knee, or you have your hand behind your head and you're doing this number here. That's active stretching. That's dynamic stretching, which better leads to mobility. And what you also need to be doing along with that is foam rolling the muscles around those joints too, because that helps loosen up the muscles around the joints, and then that loosens their hold on the joint, and then you can better move through that range of motion. And you can think of it like a rubber band tied on tight, and then restricts the movement. But if you loosen that rubber band, then you can get better movement. And so the foam rolling can help with that. The foam rolling can help loosen the tight muscles, knots in the muscles, things like that. It's like a massage, and it can help loosen knots in the muscles and things like that. And you also need to be doing ROM exercises, range of motion. So that's those rotations and the flexing and extending and things like that, the neck rolls and things like that. In this case, we do like ankle rolls and hip circles and things like that for the ankles and the hips, for focusing on the knees. So you need to be doing things like that. That will help, because that helps practice that range of motion. That helps run your joint through those range of motions. If you're doing those ankle rotations and those hip circles and things like that, helps practice that range of motion, helps work that range of motion. Because if you're not practicing, if you're not working, then it starts to get stiff. It's kind of like that. If you don't use it, you lose it. So this is using it so you don't lose it. Because you get better at what you practice, and you get worse at what you don't practice. So that keeps that going. That helps, and it helps work that range of motion. So, and that will help lead to better mobility in those joints. So these are things that can help increase that range of motion and that mobility in the ankle and hip joints, that can help take the load off of your knees and put it onto the thighs, glutes, and hamstrings where it needs to be, so that you're not overloading your knees. Because the thighs, glutes, and hamstrings, these are our biggest muscles, so they take big loads. And if you try to take that big load for the squat and lunges and things like that and put it on your knees, that is going to shoot your knees. So you need to be putting that load on the thighs, glutes, and hamstrings where it belongs. And to do that, you increase the range of motion in your ankle and hip joints. To do that, you do the active stretching, the range of motion exercises, and the foam rolling. And the best time to foam roll is right after your workout when your muscles are still warm. So this is the time to be doing the stretches and to be foam rolling. And you need to stretch before your workout too, to help loosen it up to get ready for your workout. You can also stretch again after the workout and do the foam rolling while your muscles are still warm to help work that muscle, to help loosen that up. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you got something that you can take in your training sessions every day. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe and ring that bell icon so you don't miss the next video. And remember, train hard, stay inspired. I'll see you next time.